Hi there, this is Matt with State of Flux here with another review from our Star Trek lineup. This is Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home. And this, up until the 2000s, was the most successful Star Trek movie of them all. And it's not hard to figure out why. This is the most inviting and least alien-like of the Star Trek franchise, in that most of it takes place in what was then modern day. This movie came out the year I was born, and is one that I have a particular fondness of. I remember watching it. I tell the story in my Star Trek 2 analysis of how I got to watch those movies. And I will say that, like, watching Star Trek 2, I loved it, but it just, like, it hits you in the feels, and then you watch Star Trek 3, and that one really immerses you in this sense of loss, and it ends on this note of optimism and stuff of what might come in the future, but you're not really convinced that the Spock that's there is going to be the Spock you're familiar with. And so after two particularly heavy movies emotionally, this one comes as a note of levity and sparks absolute joy while watching. The sense of humor, which I talked about a little bit in my Search for Spock review, was something that I really enjoyed. I thought the character beats, particularly with like Sulu and stuff, and Kirk had many himself. One I didn't even mention, which is my favorite line in the movie besides "How many fingers am I holding up?" is when the Klingon, he's like, do you surrender or do you want to be killed? And the Klingon says that he wants to die, and he's like, great, I'll kill you later, which is one of my favorite lines. This continues that trajectory. There's a lot of lightness and funniness, which is really weird because the first like half hour of this movie is pretty morose and is a firm continuation of things left unresolved from the end of 3. The first half hour and last 5 minutes of this film really do act as a bookending sequel to the Search for Spock in a traditional narrative trajectory. You're left watching Spock redevelop who he is, see the ramifications for what happens when Kirk and crew steal the Enterprise and then blow up the Enterprise, and how the Klingons respond to that as, is this the spark of war coming up? These things are examined, and you think that the movie's going to pivot in one direction, but then this great big alien cylinder shows up trying to speak alien whale, trying to communicate with the whales on our planet, but can't because they've been hunted to extinction. So they reach out to that ship that's furthest out in the quadrant, which is Kirk's bird of prey, the one that they stole from the Klingons. So Kirk and crew hurl themselves around the sun, and we see tremendous little animation. Like, I think I talked briefly about the Pixar animation, or the pre-Pixar, the Lucasfilm animation from Wrath of Khan, which they really got their money's worth because it shows up in Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock, and The Voyage Home pretty much in its uninterrupted form each time, so they really got their money's worth there. But you see like this time travel backwards thing where the heads morph and dissolve into everything, and it's done with very early computer animation. It's really stunning shot and whatnot. I think Leonard Nimoy continues this visual eye for making really grandiose looking films on a relatively small budget, and does so successfully. It's shocking to me that he only directed a couple of movies. He had the biggest hit after this movie. He would go on to make his movie that was the biggest hit of his career, which was Three Men and a Lady, or Three Men and a Baby, sorry, which is a vastly better movie than Three Men and a Little Lady. It's a great movie, and he didn't really make anything after that. He kind of retired and became kind of a photographer, from my understanding, and a poet and stuff like that. But I digress. What I really like about this is also continuing on with the previous film, every character gets something to do. They all have their like little side quests of what to do once they go back in time to San Francisco to try and save those whales. They give Kirk a little romance, which was kind of lacking, I would argue, in the previous movies. Is oftentimes you watch the Star Trek individual episodes and there was always like a romantic tone to certain episodes. They would find a love interest for some character. And you didn't really get that in either of the previous movies. This one puts that in there, and it's kind of a lovely story. I really like the character that they create for Kirk to kind of have romantic beats with. And then Kirk and Spock playing off each other is just so refreshing to see after a movie completely absent of that. And it really makes the journey you went on, as dark as it got in the previous movie, really worthwhile. And you come, it's impossible not to come away from this movie smiling. And I think that's what it is. And weirdly enough, I don't really have a whole lot to say with the movie. I do know that some people kind of took issue with the political nature of this film. I'm not going to try saying that word again, I always stumble across it. Which has always been weird to me, because Star Trek has always been very political, but I've talked to some circles in recent years especially who don't like this one because it's got a very clear agenda, and I'm like, F you, every time you frame your camera and are telling a story, you're doing so in a way that you're painting a picture of what you want to see, which means that everything that you're painting in front of the camera has a purpose, and there is going to be political messaging in there whether you like it or not. That's just the way of the world, and Star Trek, which has always been consciously political, I think that's just a dumbass criticism. Double dumbass on you, I say. But I digress. This movie I think is fantastic. Do I think it's a little over applauded? A little bit. I do think that the movie has some parts where it lulls a little too much. But it's having so much fun with itself that I'm willing to bypass that. And like it's a good time, scripted by many people. Nicholas Meyer had his hand in developing this, as did Harve Bennett and Leonard Nimoy himself and a couple others. So they really shaped a movie that was a good time for the audience. And that is also kind of why it's all the more striking that the fifth movie didn't get, this was the most financially successful movie of the original 6 Star Trek films. So why didn't the fifth movie get the full embrace of the studio? I mean, I guess that same studio was also financing Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and they were stripping money from that film to put towards Indy, but that's a different movie for a different review, which is a good time to talk about that, because somebody actually brought it up in my previous videos comments. I am going to review Star Trek V: The Final Frontier, but as I said when I started doing these reviews, I'm sort of following the narrative of the Enterprise sort of as I see it, and this is the order with which I watch the movies and TV shows. So I start with the original Star Trek, I include the animated series, and then I just did a charitable rewatch of the motion picture. I usually never include that in my watches, but then I go from the animated series to Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock, Voyage home. The next movie I watch is not The Final Frontier, so I'm not going to be doing a review for it yet. I do that rewatch much later down the timeline, because I think in watching the timeline in my own head canon, I think it makes much more sense to go from this film into the undiscovered country, and then go from there into the next generation, generations, First Contact. First Contact winds and literally ends with Zefram Cochrane, so for me, I use that as the point with which I start Enterprise, which leads into Star Trek, the Abrams movie, Into Darkness, Star Trek Beyond, and Beyond ends with a picture of the crew from Star Trek V, taken from Star Trek V, so that's where I include Star Trek V. So you have a few weeks to get to Star Trek V, but we will get there, I promise. So up next you'll be getting a review for Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. Let me know what you think of this film in the comments down below. I absolutely love it. Bones gets the highlights of the movie yet again when he goes to the hospital and he's talking about the primitive savages that they're trying to cure things with, and that makes me laugh 100% of the time. I give this movie 3.5 out of 4 stars. Thanks for watching, like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Peace.